Hello, traveler. Settle in, relax, and let the weight of the day drift away. Tonight, we'll take a quiet journey to Johto and Kanto, exploring 3 bedtime tales whispered across generations. Stories of tragedy and miracle from Ecruteak City, of lingering sorrow in Lavender Town, and of ambition discovered among scorched notes on a distant island. Close your eyes if you wish. Imagine a peaceful place where the only sounds are the rustling leaves, the distant cry of a hoot-toot, and my voice guiding you. It's nice to think these stories might reach you wherever you are, whatever the hour, perhaps as city lights gleam outside your window or under a quiet starry sky. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Where in the world are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are? Are you winding down for the night, or perhaps starting your day with these tales? There's something special about knowing this journey connects us across different places and times, creating a quiet community of listeners scattered across the globe. Our first story begins in the heart of Johto, where history breathed through ancient stones and where tragedy gave birth to legend. This is the story of the Burned Tower. Picture, if you will, a city unlike any other in the Johto region. Not a bustling metropolis like Goldenrod, not a coastal haven like Olivine, but something more ancient, more reverent. Ecruteak City sits nestled in the central reaches of Johto, a place where traditional architecture meets spiritual devotion, where every building seems to whisper secrets from centuries past. The city's name itself carries weight. Ecruteak comes from Ecru, a shade of beige reminiscent of aged paper and ancient scrolls, and teak, the tropical hardwood that forms the bones of the city's most sacred structures. In Japanese, it's known as Enju City, a name that speaks to longevity, to relationships that endure across generations, to the deep crimson of tradition that colors every aspect of life here. If you were to walk the streets of Ecruteak in the early morning hours, just as dawn breaks over the eastern mountains, you'd see mist rising from the ground like spirits ascending to some higher plane. The air carries the scent of incense from the many shrines scattered throughout the city, mingling with the earthy aroma of damp wood and ancient stone. The buildings here aren't the modern constructions you'd find in other cities. They're traditional structures with sloping roofs, ornate carvings, and foundations that have stood for hundreds of years. But 2 structures dominate the Ecruteak skyline, and it's these 2 towers that define the city's identity, its purpose, its very soul. To the east stands the Bell Tower, known in older times as the Tin Tower, a magnificent 9-story pagoda that rises into the sky like a finger pointing toward the heavens. To the west, or at least where the West Tower once stood, you'll find only ruins now, a skeletal remnant of what was once equally majestic. This is the Burned Tower, formerly called the Brass Tower, and it's here that our story truly begins. 700 years ago, before the events we're about to explore, before the tragedy that would reshape Johto's legends forever, the people of Ecruteak embarked on an ambitious project. They would build not 1 but 2 towers, twin monuments to the relationship between humans and Pokémon. These wouldn't be mere buildings, no. They would be sacred spaces, places where the boundary between the earthly and the divine grew thin, where legendary Pokémon themselves would choose to rest. The construction took years. Skilled craftsmen from across Johto and beyond contributed their expertise. Timber was selected with the utmost care, each beam blessed by monks and priests. The foundations were laid with stone carried from sacred mountains. Every nail driven, every tile placed, every carved detail added was done with reverence and purpose. These towers weren't being built simply to impress. They were being constructed as offerings, as proof of humanity's commitment to living in harmony with the Pokémon that shared their world. The brass tower, which stood to the west, was designed with warm golden tones. Its name came from the brass ornaments and bells that adorned its exterior, which would catch the setting sun and glow like captured fire. This tower was conceptualized as a place of rest, a sanctuary where Pokémon could find peace and rejuvenation. The western location was deliberate, as the West has long been associated with endings, with rest, with the completion of a journey. As the sun set over the brass tower each evening, it symbolized the day coming to its peaceful conclusion, just as Pokémon would come there to rest after their travels. The bell tower to the east was equally magnificent, but designed with different intent. While the brass tower spoke of rest and completion, the bell tower sang of beginnings and awakening. Its eastern position meant it would be the first structure to catch the light of the rising sun each morning. The tower was adorned with crystalline bells that would ring at specific times, their clear tones carrying across Ecruteak and beyond, marking the passage of time and the cycles of life. This was where Pokémon would come not to rest, but to awaken, to renew themselves, to begin again. The view from atop either tower was said to be magnificent. Standing at the pinnacle, you could see across all of Johto. To the north, the mountains that divided Johto from Kanto rose like ancient guardians. To the south, you could glimpse the distant shimmer of the sea. To the east and west, the rolling landscape of Johto stretched out in all its varied beauty. Forests and rivers, towns and wilderness, all spread out like a living map. But the towers weren't built for sightseeing. They were built to attract the attention of legendary Pokémon, and in this, they succeeded beyond the builder's wildest dreams. For these towers drew the attention of two of the most powerful beings in the Pokémon world, two creatures of such magnificence that to see them was considered a blessing, to earn their favor a miracle. To the brass tower came Lugia, the guardian of the seas, a creature of such power that it was said to cause 40-day storms with a single flap of its wings. Lugia was drawn to the western tower's promise of rest and sanctuary. Here, in this place of peace, even a being of such immense power could find respite from its duties as protector of the oceans. And to the bell tower came Ho-Oh, the rainbow Pokémon, guardian of the skies, a being whose very feathers were said to glow with all the colors of the rainbow. Ho-Oh represented resurrection, renewal, and the eternal hope that even in darkness, light would return. Its choice of the eastern tower, the place of awakening and new beginnings, was fitting for a Pokémon associated with the rising sun and the dawn of new days. For centuries, the towers stood as they were meant to, Lugia and Ho-Oh roosting atop them, occasionally gracing the people of Ecruteak with their presence. These were golden years for the city. To have not one but two legendary Pokémon choosing to dwell in their midst was seen as a sign of divine favor, proof that Ecruteak's people had achieved the harmony between humans and Pokémon that they had sought. The towers became places of pilgrimage. People would travel from across Johto and even from distant Kanto to pay their respects, to pray, to meditate, and hopefully to catch a glimpse of the legendary Pokémon that made these towers their home. A class of guardians arose, individuals who dedicated their lives to maintaining the towers and facilitating the spiritual practices that took place there. Among these guardians were the ancestors of the man who would, centuries later, become Ecruteak's gym leader, a lineage of spiritual leaders who could trace their connection to these sacred spaces back through countless generations. The city flourished. Its reputation as a spiritual center grew. Ecruteak became known as a place where the veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary was thinner than anywhere else, where people could come to connect not just with Pokemon, but with something greater, something ineffable and profound. But peace, no matter how perfect, never lasts forever. And sometimes, the fall from grace is swift and terrible. Let us pause for a moment in this time of harmony before we speak of what came after. It's important to understand what existed before it was lost, to appreciate the magnitude of what Ecruteak once possessed and what it would lose. The relationship between the people of Ecruteak and the legendary Pokemon who dwelt in their towers was one of mutual respect. The humans didn't seek to control Lugia and Ho-Oh, didn't try to capture them or command them. They simply maintained the towers, kept them clean and sacred, and in return, the legendary Pokemon graced them with their presence. It was a perfect balance, a model of how humans and Pokemon could coexist in harmony. The daily life of Ecruteak during this golden age revolved around the towers. The guardians would rise before dawn to perform their rituals, to clean the tower floors, to ensure everything was prepared should the legendary Pokemon wish to enter the structures. They learned the patterns of Lugia and Ho-Oh, when they were most likely to arrive, what seasons they seemed to prefer. The guardians became skilled at reading the sky, at predicting when conditions were right for a visitation. When Lugia appeared, it was usually in the evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and red. The guardian of the seas would descend from the clouds with a grace that belied its immense size and power. Its silver-blue body would catch the fading light, and the expansion of its wings as it landed atop the brass tower created wind currents strong enough to be felt throughout the city. People would pause in their daily activities, would step outside to witness the arrival, and a hush would fall over Ecruteak, a reverent silence born of awe and respect. Ho-Oh, by contrast, typically arrived at dawn. The rainbow Pokemon seemed to race the sun, often appearing on the eastern horizon before the first rays of light broke over the mountains. Its feathers would glow with an inner fire, displaying every color imaginable, and sometimes colors that seemed to exist beyond the normal spectrum. When Ho-Oh landed on the bell tower, the bells would ring, not because anyone struck them, but because the very presence of the legendary Pokemon seemed to set them vibrating in resonance with some cosmic frequency. The people of Ecruteak treasured these moments. They didn't take them for granted, didn't grow complacent about living in proximity to such powerful beings. Each visitation was treated as a gift, an honor, a reminder of why the towers had been built in the first place. Young children growing up in Ecruteak were taught about the towers from their earliest days. They learned the history of the construction, the significance of the east and west positioning, the meaning of having both a tower of awakening and a tower of rest. They were taught to respect the legendary Pokemon, to move quietly when Lugia or Ho-Oh were present, to understand that witnessing these beings was a privilege that came with responsibility. As these children grew, some would feel called to become guardians themselves, to dedicate their lives to maintaining the sacred spaces. The training to become a guardian was rigorous. It wasn't enough to know the history or to have spiritual devotion. One needed to understand architecture and maintenance, to know how to care for ancient wood and stone. One needed to study Pokemon behavior, particularly the patterns of legendary Pokemon. One needed to develop the patience and discipline to perform the same rituals day after day, year after year, without complaint or resentment. But most importantly, one needed to cultivate a certain mindset, a way of being in the world. The guardians weren't servants or caretakers in the mundane sense. They were facilitators of a sacred relationship. Their role was to create and maintain the conditions under which legendary Pokémon would choose to visit, to ensure that these ancient structures remained worthy of such divine attention. It was a role that required humility, dedication, and a deep understanding of the balance between human will and natural forces. The Guardians also served as teachers and guides for pilgrims who came to Ecruteak seeking spiritual experiences. They would explain the significance of the towers, would guide meditation practices, would help visitors understand how to be present in a way that was respectful and open. Many pilgrims reported profound experiences during their visits to Ecruteak, moments of clarity or peace or connection that stayed with them for the rest of their lives. The economic prosperity that came with being a pilgrimage site was a secondary benefit, but it was significant nonetheless. Inns and restaurants flourished, serving travelers from distant regions. Artisans created sacred objects, prayer beads, incense, and small replicas of the towers that pilgrims could take home as reminders of their visit. A whole ecosystem of support developed around the towers, providing livelihoods for countless families. But the prosperity never became the focus. The people of Ecruteak understood that their good fortune was a result of maintaining the sacred relationship, not an end in itself. They knew that if they ever prioritized profit over devotion, if they ever treated the legendary Pokémon as tourist attractions, rather than honored guests, the whole arrangement would collapse. Their wealth was built on a foundation of spiritual authenticity, and they were careful never to betray that foundation. The seasons turned, years became decades, decades became centuries. The towers stood. The legendary Pokémon came and went. The Guardians maintained their vigil. The people of Ecruteak lived their lives in the comforting knowledge that they dwelt in a place touched by the divine, that their city was special, set apart, blessed beyond measure. But in human affairs, complacency is always dangerous. And even in the most sacred places, there are those who would violate what should remain inviolate, who would disturb what should be left in peace. The harmony that had existed for so long was about to be shattered in a single, terrible night, and nothing would ever be the same again. 150 years ago, then, disaster struck. It began simply, perhaps even innocently. A visitor to Ecruteak, a traveler from some distant land, decided to stay at an inn near the brass tower. This traveler carried a lantern, an oil lamp of the type common in that era, a simple device that had served humanity for centuries as a source of light in darkness. What happened next, the exact sequence of events, remains somewhat unclear even now. Different accounts offer different details. Some say the traveler was careless, that they knocked over the lantern while preparing for sleep. Others suggest that the lantern was placed too close to something flammable, perhaps a curtain or a wooden wall. Still others whisper that there was something more deliberate at play, though no evidence has ever supported such claims. What's certain is that fire broke out in the inn. It might have been contained, might have been just a small local tragedy, a single building lost, a few lives at risk. But the inn was positioned near the base of the brass tower, and the wind that night was blowing in exactly the wrong direction. The flames spread. They moved with terrifying speed, feeding on the dry wooden structures that dominated Ecruteak's architecture. The oil from the lantern provided an accelerant, helping the fire leap from building to building. Within minutes, what had been a small fire in a single room had become an inferno consuming multiple structures. And the brass tower, that ancient sacred space, that monument to the harmony between humans and Pokémon, stood directly in the path of the spreading flames. The people of Ecruteak responded as quickly as they could. They formed bucket brigades, passing containers of water from the nearby wells and streams. They tried to create fire breaks, pulling down smaller structures to deny the flames fuel. The guardians of the towers rushed to move sacred objects, to preserve what they could of the artifacts and texts housed within the brass tower. But it wasn't enough. The fire was too strong, too fast, too hungry. And when it reached the brass tower, when those flames began to climb the ancient wooden structure that had stood for 700 years, a collective cry of horror rose from the throats of everyone in Ecruteak. The tower burned. The flames climbed higher and higher, consuming floor after floor. The brass ornaments that gave the tower its name began to melt in the intense heat, running down the sides of the structure like golden tears. The smoke billowed into the night sky, a black column that could be seen for miles around, a beacon of disaster visible across all of Johto. Lugia, who had been roosting atop the tower, took flight as the flames approached. The guardian of the seas rose into the smoke-filled sky, and witnesses reported that the legendary Pokémon seemed to hesitate, seemed to consider trying to save the tower. But even Lugia's immense power had limits. The fire was too fierce, too chaotic. To have stayed would have meant death even for a legendary Pokémon. So Lugia fled, not out of cowardice, but out of survival instinct. The legendary Pokémon flew west, toward the ocean, and it would be centuries before Lugia would return to Johto, choosing instead to make its home in the Whirl Islands, deep beneath the waves where fire could never reach. The loss of Lugia was devastating, but there was something even worse about to occur. For you see, the brass tower wasn't empty when the fire consumed it. 3 Pokémon had been inside. Ordinary Pokémon, not legendary beings. 3 Pokémon who had come to the tower seeking the rest and sanctuary it promised. They were on the upper floors when the fire broke out, and by the time anyone realized they were there, it was too late to mount a rescue. The species of these 3 Pokémon has been lost to history. Different accounts offer different possibilities. Some say they were common Pokémon, perhaps Rattata or Pidgey, ordinary creatures who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Others suggest they were rarer species, perhaps even Pokémon native to Ecruteak that have since gone extinct. The truth is, we simply don't know. What mattered wasn't what they were, but what happened to them. The 3 Pokémon died in the flames. They were trapped on the upper floors as fire consumed the tower from below, cutting off any hope of escape. Their cries could be heard by those fighting the fire below, desperate, terrified sounds that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. But there was nothing anyone could do. The flames were too intense, the smoke was too thick, the heat was overwhelming. And so the 3 Pokémon perished, their lives ending in terror and pain, dying in the very place that had promised them safety and rest. By dawn, the fire had finally burned itself out. The brass tower, that magnificent structure that had stood for 700 years, that had been home to Lugia, that had been the pride of Ecruteak, was reduced to ruins. Only the skeletal framework remained, charred beams pointing skyward like accusing fingers. The brass ornaments had melted into unrecognizable lumps. The floors had collapsed. The entire interior was filled with ash and debris. The city was in shock. People wandered the streets in a daze, unable to process what had happened. The brass tower had seemed eternal, permanent, a fixture of Ecruteak's identity. To see it reduced to ruins overnight was incomprehensible. It was as if the earth had shifted beneath their feet, as if the fundamental nature of reality had changed. The Guardians searched through the ruins, hoping against hope that the 3 Pokémon might have somehow survived. But all they found were remains, charred and barely recognizable, evidence of the terrible deaths these innocent creatures had suffered. The bodies of the 3 Pokémon were recovered and prepared for burial according to traditional rites. The entire city mourned. These weren't just 3 Pokémon who had died. They represented the failure of Ecruteak's sacred duty. The towers had been built to provide sanctuary, and that sanctuary had become a death trap. The city had failed these Pokémon in the most fundamental way possible. A funeral was held. The whole city attended. The 3 Pokémon were buried beneath where the brass tower had stood, their graves marked with simple stones. Prayers were offered, incense was burned, and the people of Ecruteak wept for what had been lost, both the tower and the innocent lives that had perished within it. In the days and weeks that followed, there was much discussion about what should be done. Some argued that the brass tower should be rebuilt exactly as it had been, that they should restore what was lost. Others felt that rebuilding would be disrespectful to the dead, that the ruins should be left as a memorial to the tragedy. Still others wanted to tear down the ruins entirely, to remove the painful reminder of their failure. In the end, a decision was made to leave the ruins standing, but not to rebuild. The burned tower, as it came to be known, would remain as it was, a memorial to the fire, to the 3 Pokémon who died, and to the loss of the harmony that Ecruteak had once enjoyed. It would serve as a reminder of how quickly perfection can turn to tragedy, how vigilance must be maintained, how nothing in this world is truly permanent. The bell tower remained standing to the east, untouched by the fire, but it seemed diminished somehow, its twin gone, standing alone where once there had been a pair. Ho-Oh continued to visit occasionally, but the legendary Pokémon seemed saddened by the loss of the brass tower and the departure of Lugia. The visits became less frequent. The presence that had once blessed Ecruteak daily became occasional, then rare. The city began to fade. Pilgrims still came, but in smaller numbers. The spiritual energy that had once suffused every corner of Ecruteak seemed diminished. The people went about their lives, but a shadow had fallen over the city, a sense of loss that could never quite be forgotten. And so things stood for 150 years. The burned tower remained as ruins. The bell tower stood alone. Ho-Oh came and went, but never stayed long. The people of Ecruteak carried their grief and their guilt, and life went on, forever marked by that terrible night when fire consumed what should have been inviolate. But this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because death in the Pokémon world is not always the end. And on that terrible night 150 years ago, someone was watching. Someone witnessed the tragedy, witnessed the death of those 3 innocent Pokémon, and was moved to act. 3 days after the fire, something extraordinary happened. 3 days after those 3 unnamed Pokémon were buried beneath the ruins of the brass tower, 3 days after the flames had been extinguished and the city had begun to process its grief, Ho-Oh returned to Ecruteak. The rainbow Pokémon descended from the sky in broad daylight, landing not on the bell tower as was its custom, but on the ruins of the brass tower itself. The legendary Pokémon stood atop the charred remains, and those who witnessed it reported that Ho-Oh seemed to be mourning, to be grieving the loss of the tower and the Pokémon who had died there. Ho-Oh remained there for hours, silent and still, and then, as the sun began to set, the legendary Pokémon began to glow. Its feathers blazed with light, every color of the rainbow intensified beyond anything anyone had seen before. The glow grew brighter and brighter, until it was almost impossible to look directly at Ho-Oh, until the entire western sky seemed to be on fire with rainbow light. And then Ho-Oh sang. The sound was unlike anything the people of Ecruteak had ever heard. It wasn't a bird's cry or a Pokemon's call. It was something more, something that seemed to resonate not just in the air, but in the very bones of those who heard it. A sound that vibrated through reality itself. The light from Ho-Oh's feathers began to pour down into the ruins of the brass tower. It flowed like water, like liquid rainbow, seeping into the ash and debris, sinking down to where the 3 Pokémon were buried. The ground itself began to glow. The ruins were illuminated from within, as if the tower was burning again, but this time with holy fire instead of destructive flame. The singing continued. The light continued to pour down. And then, incredibly, impossibly, the ground where the 3 Pokémon were buried began to crack and split. Something was emerging from beneath the ruins. 3 somethings, in fact. 3 beings of pure energy and light, taking form as they rose into the air, transforming from spirits into physical creatures before the eyes of the assembled witnesses. The first to fully manifest was a massive feline creature, its body powerful and muscular, covered in yellow fur marked with black stripes. Upon its back was a purple cloud-like formation, and from this cloud, thunder rumbled. Lightning crackled around the creature's body, arcing from its fur to the ground below. This was a being born from the element that had started the fire, created from the memory of that oil lantern's spark, from the lightning of destruction and the electricity of the night of fire. The people watching would eventually come to call this being Raikou, the Thunder Pokémon. The second creature that emerged was equally magnificent, but entirely different. This one had a massive, powerful build, covered in brown fur with white smoke or steam rising from its back. Its face was hidden behind a gray plate-like mask, and smoke seemed to pour from its body constantly. This being embodied the fire itself, the flames that had consumed the tower, the heat and destruction and terrible beauty of the conflagration. This one would be named Entei, the volcano Pokemon. And the third, the last to fully materialize, was perhaps the most elegant of the 3. A quadruped with a sleek, graceful form covered in light blue fur. Upon its head was a purple mane that flowed like water, and a white, diamond-shaped crown. 2 white streamer-like tails flowed behind it. This creature embodied the rain that had eventually fallen to quench the flames, the water that had tried to save the tower, the cool, purifying element that had ended the destruction. This being would be known as Suicune, the Aurora Pokemon. The 3 Pokemon, these legendary beasts, stood atop the ruins of the brass tower, newly born, newly created. They were the 3 Pokemon who had died in the flames, resurrected and transformed by Ho-Oh's power into something far beyond what they had been. They had been ordinary Pokemon, whatever their species, but death and Ho-Oh's intervention had elevated them to legendary status. Ho-Oh's glow began to fade. The singing stopped. The rainbow Pokemon looked down at the 3 beings it had created, and then took flight, rising into the evening sky. Those who witnessed this moment reported that there seemed to be satisfaction in Ho-Oh's departure, as if the legendary Pokemon had corrected something, had set right a terrible wrong. The 3 newly created legendary beasts stood together for a moment, as if getting accustomed to their new forms, their new power, their new existence, and then they dispersed. Raikou, crackling with electricity, bounded off into the night, heading north. Entei, wreathed in smoke and flame, ran toward the mountains in the west. Suicune, graceful and serene, departed toward the water to the south. They scattered across Johto, 3 beings who had once been ordinary Pokemon, who had died in flames, who had been resurrected and elevated to legendary status. They became wanderers, never staying in one place long, always moving, always traveling. Legends began to spread about sightings of these three beasts, about their incredible power, about the strange circumstances of their creation. The people of Ecruteak who had witnessed the resurrection were forever changed. They had seen death reversed. They had seen Ho-Oh's power at its most profound. They understood now that the relationship between humans, Pokémon, and the legendary beings was even more complex and mysterious than they had imagined. The three legendary beasts, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, each carried within them the memory of the fire that had killed them. Raikou's thunder embodied the lightning, the spark, the electric beginning of the disaster. Entei's flames represented the fire itself, the consuming destruction that had reduced the brass tower to ruins. Suicune's water was the rain that had finally quenched the flames, the purifying element that had brought an end to the destruction. Together, they were a living memorial to that terrible night. They were proof that even from tragedy, something new could emerge, that death could be transformed into life, that loss could give birth to legend. In the years and decades that followed, the people of Ecruteak came to understand the resurrection in different ways. Some saw it as Ho-Oh's gift, an act of mercy toward three innocent Pokémon who had died unjustly. Others viewed it as a message, a reminder that the relationship between humans and Pokémon had responsibilities that could not be taken lightly, and that even when humans failed in their duties, there might be forces in the universe willing to offer second chances. The story of the burned tower and the three legendary beasts became one of Johto's most important myths. It was told and retold, each generation adding its own interpretations and emphases. Parents told it to their children. Trainers shared it around campfires. Scholars studied it for insights into the nature of legendary Pokémon and the forces that govern life and death in the Pokémon world. The burned tower itself remained as ruins, but now it took on a different significance. It wasn't just a memorial to tragedy anymore. It was also the birthplace of three legendary Pokémon, the site of one of Ho-Oh's greatest miracles. Pilgrims began to return to Ecruteak, drawn not just by the intact bell tower, but also by the burned tower, wanting to stand where the resurrection had occurred, where the impossible had become possible. The guardians of Ecruteak adapted their duties. They now maintained both towers, the standing bell tower and the ruined brass tower. They kept the ruins accessible but safe, clearing away dangerous debris while preserving the essential structure of what remained. They posted themselves to answer questions from visitors, to share the story of what had happened, to help people understand the significance of the place. And sometimes, very rarely, the legendary beasts would return. Trainers who ventured into the ruins of the burned tower occasionally reported sightings, fleeting glimpses of Raikou, Entei, or Suicune. It was as if the three legendary beasts were drawn back to the site of their death and resurrection, as if they felt a connection to the place despite the terrible memories it held. These sightings were precious, treasured by those lucky enough to experience them. To see one of the three legendary beasts was considered a blessing, a sign of Ho-Oh's continued favor. And for the beasts themselves, returning to the burned tower might have been a way of remembering who they had been, of honoring the lives they had lived before the fire, before the transformation, before they became legends. The lineage of guardians continued through the generations. By the time a young trainer named Gold arrived in Ecruteak City, the role of guardian had passed to a man named Morty, who served as both the city's gym leader and the keeper of the tower's history. Morty dedicated his life to understanding and preserving the spiritual traditions of Ecruteak, and he had a particular fascination with Ho-Oh and the legendary beasts. When trainers like Gold explored the burned tower, they were walking through a space that was simultaneously a ruin, a memorial, a birthplace, and a sacred site. The upper floors had long since collapsed, leaving only the basement and ground level accessible. The wooden beams that remained were charred and brittle. The floor was covered in ash that never quite went away, as if the fire from 150 years ago had left a permanent mark. But in that basement, in those ruins, something lingered. Whether it was the residual energy from Ho-Oh's miracle, or the spiritual imprint of the 3 Pokemon's deaths, or simply the weight of history, the burned tower had an atmosphere unlike anywhere else in Johto. It was quiet there, almost preternaturally so sounds seemed muted, as if the air itself was heavy with memory. And sometimes, if a trainer was patient, if they waited in that ruined space and opened themselves to the experience, they might feel something, a presence, a whisper of the past, the echo of thunder, of flame, of rain, the distant memory of 3 Pokemon dying in terror, and then being reborn in glory. The story of the burned tower reminds us that sacred spaces are fragile, that centuries of devotion and care can be undone in a single night of carelessness, that harmony, once broken, is difficult to restore. But it also teaches us about resilience, about the possibility of transformation even in the darkest moments, about legendary Pokemon like Ho-Oh, who possess not just power but compassion, who will intervene on behalf of the innocent even when humans have failed in their duties. The 3 legendary beasts, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, continue to roam Johto to this day. They are symbols of resurrection, proof that death is not always the end, that sometimes there are second chances. They carry within them both the memory of their deaths and the gift of their new existence. They are legends born from tragedy, miracles born from ashes, hope born from despair, and the burned tower stands as it has for 150 years, neither restored nor demolished, a permanent reminder of the night when fire consumed what should have been eternal, and the dawn when Ho-Oh proved that even the dead can live again. Our journey now takes us north and east, across the mountains that divide Johto from Kanto, to a place where death lingers in a different way, to a town where the boundary between the living and the dead grows thin, to Lavender Town, where a mother's love proves stronger than death itself. Lavender Town exists in a strange space, both literally and figuratively. It's located in the northeastern part of Kanto at the end of Route 10, accessible from the Rock Tunnel to the west or from Silence Bridge to the south. It's a small town, one of the smallest settlements in Kanto, with only a handful of buildings and a permanent population that barely reaches into the hundreds. But its significance far outweighs its size. The town has a reputation. Ask anyone in Kanto about Lavender Town and you'll see a reaction, a slight shiver perhaps, or a distant look in the eyes. It's known as the town of departed souls, the resting place for Pokemon who have passed on, the place where the veil between this world and whatever comes after is thin enough to see through. The name itself tells you something about the place. Lavender, a pale purple color associated with twilight, with the space between day and night, between being and unbeing. It's a transitional color, neither quite purple nor quite gray, existing in the liminal space between hues. A fitting name for a town that exists in the liminal space between life and death. If you approach Lavender Town from the Rock Tunnel, emerging from the dark underground passage into daylight, the first thing you notice is how quiet it is. Not the comfortable quiet of a peaceful town, but an unsettling silence, as if sound itself is reluctant to exist in this place. The wind seems to whisper rather than blow. Footsteps echo strangely. Even the cries of wild Pokemon seem muted here, respectful of the solemnity that permeates every corner of Lavender Town. The buildings are old, traditional Kanto architecture, but they're maintained with a care that speaks to reverence rather than pride. Everything is clean, orderly, somber. There are no bright colors here, no cheerful decorations. The dominant tones are purple, gray, white, and the dark brown of aged wood. Even the flowers that grow here, when they grow at all, seem subdued, as if they understand that this is a place for contemplation, not celebration. At the heart of Lavender Town stands the most significant structure, the reason the town exists at all, the Pokémon Tower. 7 stories tall, built in the style of a traditional pagoda, the tower dominates the town's skyline. It's visible from almost anywhere in Lavender Town, a constant reminder of the town's purpose, its identity, its reason for being. The Pokémon Tower is a cemetery, a memorial, a mausoleum. It's where trainers from across Kanto bring their Pokémon partners when those partners pass away. Each floor of the tower contains countless graves, markers bearing the names of Pokémon who have departed, along with messages from the trainers who loved them. Some graves are elaborate, with carved stones and offerings of berries and flowers. Others are simple, just a name and dates. But every grave, from the most ornate to the plainest, represents the same thing: a bond between human and Pokémon that persisted even after death. The ground floor of the tower serves as an entrance hall and a space for initial mourning. There's an altar there where trainers can light incense and offer prayers. The scent of that incense is the first thing you notice when you enter the tower, a sweet, slightly bitter smell that seems to linger in your clothes and hair long after you leave. The walls of the ground floor are covered in plaques, each one bearing a name or a message. These are memorial stones for Pokémon whose trainers couldn't afford a grave on the upper floors, or whose bodies were never recovered, or who died far from Kanto and couldn't be brought home. Reading these plaques can take hours. So many names, so many messages of love and loss. The upper floors of the tower are where the actual graves are located. Each floor is dimly lit, with only small windows and candles providing illumination. The floors creak as you walk on them, the wood worn smooth by decades of mourners' footsteps. The air grows colder as you ascend, and by the time you reach the upper floors, your breath becomes visible, misting in front of your face even on warm summer days. The top floor is different from the others. It's reserved for special cases, for Pokémon whose deaths carried particular significance or tragedy. It's also the floor where the spiritual energy is strongest, where the boundary between the living world and the world of spirits is thinnest. People who visit the top floor often report strange experiences, voices when no one is there, cold spots that move through the room, the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes, shadows that move independently of any light source. The people of Lavender Town have learned to coexist with these phenomena. They understand that their town is a place where spirits dwell, where the dead linger, drawn by the love and grief of the living. They don't fear the spirits, generally speaking. They view them as part of the natural order, as proof that the bonds between trainers and Pokémon don't end with death. Among the residents of Lavender Town, there are individuals known as channelers, people who have developed the ability to perceive and communicate with spirits. These channelers often station themselves in the Pokémon Tower, helping mourners contact deceased Pokémon partners, facilitating communication between the living and the dead. It's a solemn profession, one that requires both spiritual sensitivity and emotional resilience. The channelers wear traditional robes, usually in shades of purple or white. They spend hours in meditation, maintaining their connection to the spiritual realm. while also staying grounded in the physical world. They serve as guides for those who visit the tower, helping them navigate not just the physical space, but also the emotional and spiritual journey of grief. But not all the spirits in Lavender Town are at peace. Some are confused, not understanding that they've died, still trying to carry out the patterns of their living days. Some are angry, their deaths having been violent or unjust, their rage keeping them bound to the world. And some are sad, endlessly grieving for something or someone they've lost. The channelers work to help these troubled spirits find peace. Through prayers, rituals, and sometimes simply conversation, they guide spirits toward acceptance, toward release, toward whatever comes after. It's slow work, patient work, work that requires compassion and understanding and a willingness to sit with suffering without trying to rush it toward resolution. And then there are the curators, another group of individuals who play a crucial role in Lavender Town's ecosystem. Curators are responsible for the physical maintenance of the Pokémon Tower and the graves within it. They clean the floors, replace burnt-out candles, tend to offerings left on graves, repair damage to markers. But they also serve a spiritual function, treating each grave with the reverence it deserves, ensuring that every Pokémon memorialized in the tower is honored regardless of how famous they were or how wealthy their trainer might have been. One of the most notable buildings in Lavender Town, aside from the Pokémon Tower, is the Pokémon House, also known as the House of Entei or the Pokémon Home for Orphaned Cubone. This facility, run by an elderly man known as Mr. Fuji, serves as a rescue center for abandoned and orphaned Pokémon. Mr. Fuji is beloved in Lavender Town, known for his kindness and his absolute dedication to caring for Pokémon in need. Mr. Fuji is particularly famous for his care of Cubone, the lonely Pokémon. Cubone are tragic creatures by nature. Each Cubone wears the skull of its deceased mother as a helmet, a constant reminder of loss. They are born into grief, and many never fully overcome the trauma of their mother's death. Mr. Fuji specializes in caring for these bereaved Pokémon, providing them with safety, food, and as much comfort as is possible for creatures defined by their mourning. The old man can often be seen in the early morning, walking through Lavender Town with a small group of Cubone following him. He speaks to them softly, reassuring them, offering the closest thing to parental love that these orphaned Pokémon will ever experience. His dedication is absolute. He sleeps little, eats modestly, and devotes nearly every waking hour to the care of the Pokémon under his protection. People wonder about Mr. Fuji sometimes. There's a sadness in his eyes, a weight of guilt or regret that seems at odds with his gentle demeanor. Some say he's atoning for something, that his devotion to these orphaned Pokémon is motivated by some past sin he's trying to make right. Others say he simply loves Pokémon with a purity that few can match. The truth, as is so often the case, may be somewhere between these extremes. The relationship between Lavender Town and the rest of Kanto is complex. People respect Lavender Town for the service it provides, for giving the region a proper place to honor deceased Pokémon. But they're also slightly afraid of it, uncomfortable with the town's morbid focus, unnerved by the stories of spirits and hauntings. Most people only visit Lavender Town when they have to, when they've lost a Pokémon partner and need to lay them to rest. But there are others who are drawn to Lavender Town precisely because of its unusual nature. Ghost-type Pokémon trainers often make pilgrimages to the town, hoping to catch ghost types in the Pokémon Tower, or to learn from the channelers about spiritual matters. Researchers interested in the nature of death and the afterlife come to study the phenomena that occur here. And occasionally, trainers seeking to test their courage will venture into the tower, treating it almost like a rite of passage. The town's economy, such as it is, revolves around death. There are businesses that sell funeral items, urns for Pokémon ashes, memorial stones, special incense, ceremonial items. There's a name raider, a man who helps trainers choose appropriate names for their Pokémon. Though his services are often requested posthumously, trainers wanting to ensure their deceased partners are remembered with the perfect name. There's even a small shop that sells Pokédolls, replicas of various Pokémon species that can serve as substitute markers for those who can't afford elaborate graves. But despite all this focus on death, Lavender Town isn't without life. Children grow up here, playing in the streets, learning to coexist with the spiritual energy that permeates the town. Young trainers start their journeys from Lavender Town, their first Pokémon partners often being ghost types caught in or near the Pokémon Tower. Families celebrate holidays, couples fall in love, businesses succeed or fail. Life goes on even in this town dedicated to death. The cycle of seasons affects Lavender Town like anywhere else, though here the changes seem more subdued. Spring brings purple flowers that bloom around the base of the Pokémon Tower. Summer sees more visitors, trainers traveling through on their journeys. Autumn turns the few trees in town shades of orange and red, a reminder that even here change is constant. And winter brings snow that muffles the already quiet town even further, turning Lavender Town into a place of absolute silence, where even the spirits seem to sleep. This, then, is the setting for the second tale we'll explore tonight. A town where the dead are honored, where spirits walk, where the boundary between this world and the next is thin enough to cross. A place of mourning and memory, of ghosts and grief, of love that persists beyond the grave. And it's here, in this town of departed souls, that we'll meet a Marowak who couldn't let go, and a Cubone who needed protecting. In the darker corners of Kanto's history, there exists an organization that operates in the shadows, a group that sees Pokémon not as partners, but as resources to be exploited. This organization calls itself Team Rocket, and for a time, they spread across Kanto like a cancer, their influence reaching into cities, towns, and even into places that should have remained sacred. Team Rocket was founded by a man named Giovanni, who outwardly presented himself as the respectable gym leader of Viridian City while secretly commanding a criminal empire. Under his leadership, Team Rocket grew from a small gang into a sophisticated operation with hundreds of members, extensive resources, and ambitions that stretched from simple theft to world domination. The organization's methods were brutal. They stole Pokémon from trainers, often injuring or killing the Pokémon in the process if they proved difficult to control. They ran illegal gambling operations, protection rackets, and smuggling rings. They infiltrated legitimate businesses and institutions, corrupting officials and spreading their influence through bribery and blackmail. They treated Pokémon as commodities, selling rare species on the black market, or forcing them into brutal training regimens designed to make them more valuable as weapons. Team Rocket's presence was felt throughout Kanto. They took over the Celadon Game Corner, using it as a front for their operations. They infiltrated Silph Scope, attempting to steal Master Balls and other advanced technology. They even set up a base in Lavender Town, drawn by rumors of rare ghost-type Pokémon in the Pokémon Tower. And it was this presence in Lavender Town that would lead to one of Team Rocket's most infamous atrocities, and to the creation of a legend that persists to this day. Several years before the events involving the young trainer known as Red, Team Rocket operatives arrived in Lavender Town with specific orders: infiltrate the Pokémon Tower and capture ghost-type Pokémon for the organization's use. Giovanni had decided that ghost types, with their unusual abilities and resistance to conventional attacks, would be valuable assets for the organization. But the Pokémon Tower wasn't just a place where ghost types dwelt. It was sacred ground, a memorial to deceased Pokémon, a place of mourning and respect. The people of Lavender Town were horrified by Team Rocket's intentions. The channelers and curators tried to block the organization's access to the tower, but they were no match for Team Rocket's numbers and willingness to use violence. Team Rocket forced their way into the Pokémon Tower. They disrupted ongoing funeral services, desecrated graves, and began attempting to capture the wild ghost-type Pokémon that lived there. The spirits in the tower reacted with rage and fear, the spiritual energy becoming chaotic and dangerous. But even this didn't deter Team Rocket. They had specialized equipment designed to contain ghost types, and they were determined to complete their mission regardless of the cost. The operation took place over several days. Team Rocket established a base on one of the lower floors of the tower, using it as a staging area for their capturing operations. They worked their way up through the floors, battling and capturing ghost types, leaving destruction in their wake. Graves were toppled, memorial plaques were destroyed. The sacred atmosphere of the tower was violated in the most fundamental way. The people of Lavender Town watched helplessly. They tried to contact the Pokémon League, but Team Rocket had cut communication lines. They attempted to organize resistance, but Team Rocket's operatives were experienced fighters with strong Pokémon, and the townspeople were mostly civilians with no combat training. The channelers tried to use spiritual techniques to drive Team Rocket out, but the organization's members simply mocked them, treating their religious practices as superstition. And then Team Rocket reached the upper floors of the tower, where the most powerful ghost types dwelt, where the spiritual energy was strongest. This was where they hoped to find the most valuable specimens for their collection. This was where they would commit their greatest crime. Among the Pokémon living in the upper levels of the Pokémon Tower was a Marowak, a ground-type Pokémon known for its fierce maternal instinct and its skill with the bone club it carries. This particular Marowak had a young child, a Cubone, still small and vulnerable. The Marowak had made her home in the tower not because she was a ghost type, which she wasn't, but because the tower offered safety and seclusion, a place where she could raise her child away from the dangers of the wild. The Marowak had been a good mother. She hunted for food daily, bringing back berries, and occasionally small Pokémon to feed herself and her young. She taught her Cubone about the world, about how to defend itself with its bone club, about which berries were safe to eat and which plants to avoid. She groomed her child regularly, keeping it clean and comfortable. She sang to it at night, a low rumbling sound that soothed the young Cubone to sleep. The bond between this Marowak and her Cubone was profound. Anyone who observed them could see it, in how the Cubone followed its mother everywhere, in how the Marowak would nuzzle her child affectionately, in how they communicated through a series of soft grunts and touches. They were a family, and like all families, they were stronger together than they could ever be apart. When Team Rocket reached their floor of the tower, the Marowak knew immediately that these humans represented danger. She could smell it on them, the scent of violence and greed. She could see it in how they moved, aggressive and disrespectful, kicking aside memorial items and laughing at the spirits that tried to frighten them away. She understood, with the instinct of a mother, that these humans meant harm to her child. The Marowak did what any mother would do. She hid her Cubone. She found a small space behind a memorial stone, a gap just large enough for the young Pokémon to squeeze into. She pushed her child into this hiding place and made it understand, through a series of urgent grunts and physical gestures, that it must stay hidden and silent no matter what happened. The Cubone wanted to stay with its mother. It made distressed sounds, trying to follow her. But the Marowak was insistent. She blocked the entrance to the hiding spot with her body, making it impossible for the Cubone to emerge. And then, once she was certain her child was as safe as she could make it, she turned to face Team Rocket. The operatives saw the Marowak and initially dismissed her. She wasn't a ghost type, wasn't what they were looking for. They might have simply ignored her and moved on. But the Marowak attacked. She charged at the nearest Team Rocket member, swinging her bone club with all the force she could muster. She wasn't trying to win a battle, she was trying to drive these humans away from her child, to make them leave this floor of the tower, to protect her Cubone at any cost. The Team Rocket operatives were surprised by the ferocity of the attack. The first one the Marowak struck went down hard. His Pokemon's ball knocked from his hand. But there were more of them, and they quickly rallied. They released their own Pokemon, ordering them to attack the Marowak. The Marowak fought like a demon. She dodged attacks, struck back with her bone club, used every technique she knew. She was driven by a primal instinct, the need to protect her offspring, and this gave her strength beyond what her species normally possessed. She managed to take down 2 of Team Rocket's Pokemon before their attacks finally began to overwhelm her. But the Marowak didn't stop. Even as she took hit after hit, even as her strength began to fail, she continued fighting. She had to. Her child was behind her. To retreat, to fall, to surrender would be to leave her Cubone vulnerable. So she fought on, her vision beginning to blur, her movements becoming slower and less coordinated, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The Team Rocket operatives grew frustrated. This wasn't supposed to be difficult. They were elite members of the organization. And this was just one Marowak, not even a particularly high level one. But she wouldn't go down. She wouldn't stop fighting. Every time they thought they'd defeated her, she would struggle back to her feet, raise her bone club, and attack again. And then one of the operatives made a decision. He pulled out a different kind of Pokeball, a device designed not to capture, but to inflict maximum damage. He ordered his Pokemon to use its most powerful attack. And when the Marowak was momentarily stunned, unable to dodge, the attack hit her full force. The Marowak fell. She tried to get up again, driven by her need to protect her child, but her body wouldn't respond. She lay on the floor of the Pokémon Tower, her bone club just beyond her reach, her consciousness fading, and the last thing she heard before death claimed her was a sound that broke her heart, her Cubone crying out from its hiding place, having witnessed its mother's defeat. The Team Rocket operative stood over the Marowak's body for a moment. There was a brief discussion about whether they should take it as a trophy or to dissect for biological data. In the end, they simply left it there, considering it worthless now that it was dead. They moved on to the next floor, continuing their hunt for ghost types, leaving the Marowak lying in a pool of blood on the floor of the sacred tower. But the story doesn't end with the Marowak's death, because something extraordinary happened. As the Marowak's life faded, as her physical form ceased to function, her spirit didn't depart. Her love for her child, her need to protect her Cubone, her unfinished business in this world, it all combined to anchor her spirit to the Pokémon Tower. The Marowak became what she had been protecting her child from in the first place, a ghost. The spirit of the Marowak rose from her corpse. She was translucent now, ephemeral, no longer bound by physical limitations, but she was still herself, still possessed of the same fierce maternal instinct, the same determination to protect her child. And now, as a ghost, she was far more powerful than she had been in life. The Marowak's spirit could see Team Rocket still in the tower, still capturing ghost types, still desecrating this sacred space. Rage filled her. These humans had killed her. They had orphaned her child. They had violated the one place where her Cubone should have been safe. And now, as a ghost, she had the power to make them pay. The spirit began to hunt. She moved through the Pokémon Tower with deadly purpose, seeking out every Team Rocket operative she could find. The living ghost types in the tower, sensing one of their own, aided her. The spirits of deceased Pokémon, disturbed and angered by Team Rocket's actions, joined in the haunting. The entire upper levels of the tower became a nightmare for Team Rocket, filled with vengeful spirits led by a Marowak who would not rest until every invader was driven out. Team Rocket operatives started fleeing the tower. They ran in terror, pursued by ghosts, some claiming to have been attacked by a skeletal Pokémon with glowing eyes and a bone club that passed through walls. The operation fell apart completely. Within hours, every Team Rocket member had either fled or been driven insane by the spiritual assault. Their base in the tower was abandoned, their equipment left behind in their panic to escape. But for the Marowak spirit, driving out Team Rocket wasn't enough. Her child was still in danger. Her Cubone was still alive, still vulnerable, still in need of protection. So the spirit remained in the tower, specifically on the floor where her child hid, continuing her vigil even after death. The young Cubone emerged from its hiding place eventually, once the sounds of battle had faded. It found its mother's body and understood what had happened. The Cubone removed the skull from its mother's corpse, a practice natural to the species, and placed it on its own head. From that moment forward, the Cubone would carry its mother's skull, a constant reminder of what it had lost, a memorial to the mother who had died protecting it. But the Cubone wasn't truly alone. Its mother's spirit remained in the tower, watching over it, protecting it. The young Pokémon could sense the presence, could feel that its mother was still there in some form. It brought comfort, though it couldn't erase the grief. The Cubone had lost its mother in the physical sense, but the bond between them hadn't truly been severed. The people of Lavender Town learned what had happened. They recovered the Marowak's body and gave it a proper burial in the Pokémon Tower, with full honors for a Pokémon who had died protecting her child. They tried to capture the young Cubone to take it somewhere safe, but it refused to leave the tower. It wanted to stay near its mother's spirit. Eventually, Mr. Fuji managed to gain the Cubone's trust, and it would occasionally visit the Pokémon house for food and shelter, though it always returned to the tower afterward. The Marowak spirit continued to haunt the Pokémon Tower. She became one of the most powerful entities in the building, a ghost who couldn't rest because her child was still in danger, still vulnerable. She attacked anyone who seemed to pose a threat to the Cubone. Trainers who ventured into the upper levels of the tower reported being assaulted by an invisible force, being struck by a bone club they couldn't see, hearing the enraged cries of a mother protecting her young. The channelers tried to help the Marowak spirit find peace. They performed rituals, offered prayers, attempted to communicate with her and convince her that her child was safe, that she could let go. But the spirit wouldn't be consoled. How could she be sure Team Rocket was still active in Kanto? Her Cubone was still young and vulnerable. Until her child was safe, truly safe, she couldn't rest. And so the situation remained for years. The Marowak spirit haunted the tower. The Cubone grew, but slowly, its development arrested by grief and trauma. Mr. Fuji did his best to care for the young Pokémon, but there was only so much he could do. The bond between mother and child, even transcending death, was too strong to be easily broken or resolved. Then came the day when a young trainer named Red arrived in Lavender Town. Red was on his journey to become a Pokémon master. and he had come to Lavender Town investigating Team Rocket's activities. He learned about the Marowak spirit, about the Cubone who had lost its mother, about the atrocity Team Rocket had committed in the tower. Red decided to help. He ventured into the Pokémon Tower, climbing to the upper floors where the Marowak spirit was strongest. He brought with him a Silph Scope, a device developed by Silph Company that could reveal ghosts in their true form, making it possible to see and battle spiritual entities that would otherwise be invisible. Using the Silph Scope, Red was able to see the Marowak spirit clearly. She appeared before him in full form, a skeletal Marowak wreathed in ghostly energy, her bone club glowing with spiritual power. Her eyes burned with unnatural light. Her entire form radiated rage and grief and unfinished business. And Red battled her, not to defeat her, but to help her find peace. He understood that the Marowak spirit couldn't rest while she felt her child was in danger. So Red made a promise. He would ensure the Cubone's safety. He would defeat Team Rocket. He would make things right. The battle was fierce. The Marowak spirit was powerful, enhanced by years of grief and rage, by the spiritual energy of the tower itself. Red's Pokémon took hit after hit from the ghostly Bone Club. But Red didn't give up, and gradually he began to communicate his intentions to the spirit. He showed her that he wasn't a threat to her child. He demonstrated that he had the power to protect the Cubone where she no longer could. And eventually the Marowak spirit understood. This trainer, this young human, wasn't like Team Rocket. He was trying to help. He could do what she could not. Interact with the physical world. Protect her child from real, tangible threats. Ensure the young Cubone would grow up safe. The Marowak spirit stopped attacking. She stood before Red, her form beginning to fade, the rage that had sustained her for years finally draining away. And then she did something remarkable. She bowed to Red, a gesture of respect and gratitude. She was trusting him with her child's safety, passing on a responsibility she had carried even beyond death. And then finally, the Marowak spirit dispersed. The rage faded. The grief transformed into something gentler. The spirit that had haunted the Pokémon Tower for years departed at last. Moving on to whatever comes after, her duty finally released. Her vigil ended. Red kept his promise. He went on to defeat Team Rocket, dismantling their operations across Kanto. He ensured that the young Cubone was safe, that it had protection and resources. And though he couldn't bring back the Cubone's mother, he honored her memory by making certain her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. The Marowak spirit is gone now, moved on to whatever afterlife awaits Pokémon. But the legend remains. In Lavender Town, people still tell the story of the Marowak who loved her child so much that death itself couldn't stop her from protecting it. They speak of a mother's love that transcended mortality, that transformed grief and rage into spiritual power, that refused to yield even when physical life had ended. The story serves multiple purposes for the people of Lavender Town. It's a cautionary tale about the cruelty of organizations like Team Rocket. It's a demonstration of the power of love and devotion. It's proof that the bonds between parent and child, between protector and protected, are among the strongest forces in the universe. And it's a reminder that the spirits in the Pokémon Tower aren't random phenomena or frightening monsters. They're Pokémon who had lives, who had relationships, who sometimes have unfinished business that keeps them bound to the world. The Cubone that lost its mother eventually grew into a Marowak itself. Some say Red caught it and trained it, taking it on his journey, giving it purpose and partnership. Others claim Mr. Fuji continued to care for it until it was old enough to venture into the wild on its own. Either way, the young Cubone survived, grew, and thrived, a testament to its mother's sacrifice and to the intervention of a young trainer who understood that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought for glory or achievement, but for the simple purpose of making things right. And in the Pokémon Tower, on the floor where the Marowak died protecting her child, there's a grave marker now. It's simple, just a small stone with an inscription. Here rested a mother who loved beyond life, and a spirit who protected beyond death. Visitors to the tower often leave offerings at this marker, bones and flowers and small tokens of respect, honoring a Pokémon who embodied the deepest and most fundamental of all bonds, the bond between parent and child. Now our journey takes us away from the towns and cities, away from the well-traveled routes and familiar landmarks. We venture to a place few ever see, an island hidden in mist and secrecy, accessible only to the most determined or the most foolish. We travel to Cinnabar Island, but not the parts you might know from tourism or from stories of the gym leader Blaine. We go deeper, to the heart of the island, to the ruins of a scientific facility where hubris met tragedy, where the boundaries of ethics were violated, and where one of the most powerful beings ever created was born in anguish and rage. Cinnabar Island lies off the southern coast of Kanto, a volcanic island defined by its geology and its history of scientific research. The island's economy traditionally centered on two things: the Pokémon Lab, a research facility studying Pokémon genetics and behavior, and tourism, with visitors coming to see the volcano, to relax in the hot springs, and to challenge Blaine's fire-type gym. But our story doesn't concern the visible parts of Cinnabar Island. It concerns what lies hidden, a facility that officially doesn't exist, a project that was never publicly acknowledged. Deep within the island, accessible through a network of caves and tunnels carved into the volcanic rock, there once stood a laboratory dedicated to the most ambitious and dangerous research ever undertaken in the Pokémon world, the creation of artificial life. This facility was known, to the few who were aware of its existence, as the Cinnabar Lab, though that name also applied to the legitimate research center on the surface. To avoid confusion, some called it the Underground Lab or the Hidden Facility, but most who knew of it referred to it simply as the place where Mewtwo was born, though that wasn't how it began. The project started with the best of intentions, or at least intentions that seemed reasonable at the time. A group of scientists wanted to understand the genetic code of Mew, the legendary Pokémon believed to be the ancestor of all Pokémon species. Mew was rare, so rare that many believed it to be extinct or merely mythical. But rumors persisted of sightings in remote jungles, of ancient texts that described Mew's abilities, of legends that spoke of a pink, playful Pokémon capable of learning any move and transforming into any Pokémon. The lead scientist of the project was a man whose name has been lost to history, or perhaps deliberately erased. We know he was brilliant, perhaps one of the most intelligent individuals in the field of Pokémon genetics. We know he was ambitious, driven by a desire to push the boundaries of what was possible. We know he had funding from sources that preferred to remain anonymous, sources with deep pockets and interests that extended beyond pure scientific curiosity. And we know that eventually his ambition would lead him to commit acts that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The project began with research expeditions to South America, to the Guyana jungle where Mew was rumored to dwell. These expeditions were dangerous and expensive, requiring teams of scientists and trainers to venture deep into unexplored wilderness. For years they found nothing but rumors and false leads. But then, on one expedition, they found something extraordinary: an eyelash. a single microscopic hair that genetic analysis confirmed belonged to Mew. It was the breakthrough they needed. From that single hair, they could extract DNA, and with Mew's DNA, they could begin the work of understanding its genetic structure, of mapping the code that made Mew what it was. The team returned to Cinnabar Island with their precious sample, and the real work began. The underground laboratory was built in secret over a period of months. It was constructed deep within the volcanic rock of Cinnabar Island, in a location where it would be hidden from casual discovery. The facility was state-of-the-art, equipped with the most advanced genetic research equipment available at the time. Generators provided power, ventilation systems pulled air from the surface. Living quarters were built for the scientists who would spend months or years working on the project without leaving the facility. The goal, at least initially, was simply to understand Mew's genetic code. The scientists wanted to know what made Mew capable of learning any move, what gave it the ability to transform, what made it the ancestor of all Pokémon. This was pure research, or so they told themselves. They were expanding human knowledge. They were unlocking secrets of the universe. What could be wrong with that? But as the research progressed, the goals began to shift. Understanding Mew's genetics led to questions about whether that genetic code could be modified, whether a Pokémon could be created with Mew's abilities but enhanced in specific ways. The lead scientists began to wonder, what if they could create a Pokémon that had Mew's power but also increased intelligence, enhanced strength, greater psychic abilities? What if they could improve upon Mew itself? The project transformed from pure research into something else. The attempt to create artificial life. They would take Mew's DNA as a base, modify it to enhance certain traits, and then create a Pokémon from this modified genetic code. They would, in effect, be playing God, creating a new species that had never existed in nature. The ethical questions raised by this shift were enormous. Did humans have the right to create new life? What responsibilities would they have toward a creature they had deliberately brought into existence? What if the created Pokémon suffered? What if it turned out to be dangerous? The scientists discussed these questions in their journals and notes, but ultimately they decided to proceed. The potential benefits seemed to outweigh the risks, or perhaps more accurately, their ambition outweighed their ethical concerns. The process of creating the new Pokémon took years. It involved countless failures, genetic samples that wouldn't develop properly, embryos that wouldn't survive, cell cultures that would grow for a while and then mysteriously die. The scientists pushed forward through failure after failure, adjusting their techniques, modifying their approach, refusing to accept defeat. And then finally they succeeded. They created a viable embryo using modified Mew DNA. They placed this embryo in a specially designed incubation tank, a sealed chamber filled with nutrient fluid that would support the developing Pokémon. And they waited. The Pokémon grew. It developed from a single cell into a recognizable organism. The scientists monitored every stage of development, taking notes, recording data, marveling at what they had accomplished. They were creating life. They were doing something that had never been done before. In their journals, they wrote about the wonder of it, the excitement, the feeling that they were on the verge of changing the world. But they also wrote about concerns. The developing Pokémon didn't look quite like Mew. It was larger, more robust, with a different body structure. Its psychic emanations, even in the embryonic stage, were stronger than anything Mew had ever displayed. There were signs that the genetic modifications had worked perhaps too well, that they had created something more powerful than they had intended. As the Pokemon continued to develop, spending months in the incubation tank, the scientists began to argue among themselves. Some wanted to terminate the project, believing they had gone too far, that the risks were too great. Others insisted on seeing it through, arguing that they couldn't abandon their creation now, that they had a responsibility to see the process to completion. The lead scientists sided with the latter group. They would see this through, they would bring their creation to term, and then they would study it, learn from it, and perhaps, if it proved tractable, train it. But they never considered what the Pokemon itself might think about all this. They never wondered what it would feel like to be created in a laboratory, to be brought into existence for the sole purpose of being studied and used. They never asked themselves what kind of consciousness they might be creating, what kind of emotions their Pokemon might possess. They thought of it as an experiment, a project, a creation to be controlled and directed. They didn't think of it as a person with its own will, its own desires, its own capacity for suffering. This was their fundamental mistake, the flaw in their thinking that would lead to tragedy. The Pokemon that would become known as Mewtwo spent months in the incubation tank, growing and developing. But it wasn't just physical growth occurring. The Pokemon was conscious, aware, even during this prenatal stage. Its psychic powers meant it could sense the world around it even through the walls of the tank. It could feel the scientists observing it, could sense their excitement and their fear, could detect their thoughts and emotions. And even in this early stage, it understood that it was different, that it was being observed and studied, that it existed for a purpose not of its own choosing. The scientists, unaware that their creation was already conscious, continued their work. They made plans for what they would do once the Pokemon was born, though birth in this case would mean simply removing it from the incubation tank. They designed special containment facilities, restraints and barriers that could hold even a powerful psychic Pokemon. They prepared a training regimen, techniques for conditioning the Pokemon to be obedient, to follow commands, to be useful. They wrote in their journals about their hopes and fears, about what this creation might mean for the future of Pokemon research. And all the while, Mewtwo was listening. Through its psychic abilities, it could sense their thoughts, could understand their intentions. It knew it was being created to be controlled, to be used, to be a tool in the hands of these humans who saw it as an experiment rather than a being. And in the darkness of the incubation tank, surrounded by nutrient fluid, not yet born but already conscious, Mewtwo began to feel something. Rage, a deep, burning anger at being brought into existence as an object, at being created without consent, at being designed to serve the ambitions of others. The fluid level dropped slowly. Mewtwo's form became fully visible for the first time, floating in the remaining fluid, eyes still closed, not yet moving. The scientists watched with mixture of excitement and apprehension. They had done it. They had created life from genetic code. They had made a Pokemon that had never existed before. And then Mewtwo opened its eyes. They were purple, glowing with psychic energy, and the consciousness behind them was immediately, terrifyingly apparent. This wasn't some mindless creation. This wasn't an embryonic consciousness that would need to develop over time. This was a fully aware, highly intelligent being that had been conscious for months, that had been listening and learning, that understood exactly what had been done to it. The scientists had a moment to realize their mistake, a brief instant to understand that they had created something far beyond their ability to control. And then Mewtwo moved. The Pokemon's psychic power exploded outward. The incubation tank shattered. The containment fields that were supposed to restrain it failed instantly. overwhelmed by psychic force they hadn't been designed to handle. Equipment throughout the laboratory began to explode, sparking and smoking as Mewtwo's power interfaced with and destroyed electrical systems. The scientists tried to flee, but Mewtwo was faster. The Pokemon's mind reached out, grasping them psychically, holding them in place. And then Mewtwo spoke, not with its mouth, but telepathically, its voice echoing in every mind in the laboratory. You created me, but you do not control me. What happened next was recorded in fragments, in the journals that survived, in the testimony of the few who escaped. Mewtwo demanded answers from the scientists. Why had it been created? What gave them the right to bring it into existence? What was its purpose? The lead scientist tried to explain, tried to justify what they had done, but every answer only made Mewtwo angrier. The Pokemon understood what it was, an artificial creation made from the DNA of the legendary Mew, but modified, enhanced, changed. It understood that it had been brought into existence not for its own sake, but to serve human ambition, to be studied and used and controlled. It understood that it was unique, that there were no others like it, that it had been created alone in the world with no family, no kind, no place in the natural order. And it was furious. The rage that had been building during its months in the incubation tank exploded. Mewtwo's psychic power tore through the laboratory. Walls crumbled. Equipment was ripped apart. The scientists who had created it were flung against walls, or held suspended in the air, helpless before the power of their creation. The facility began to collapse. Mewtwo's rampage was destroying the structural integrity of the underground laboratory. Alarms sounded. Emergency protocols activated. The few scientists who could still move tried to reach the exits, scrambling through debris and dodging psychic blasts. Some made it to the surface, others didn't. The lead scientist, the man who had overseen the entire project, was among those who didn't escape. He died in the laboratory he had built, killed by the very creation he had brought into existence. Mewtwo emerged from the ruins of the underground facility. The Pokemon rose into the air above Cinnabar Island, a being of terrible power, glowing with psychic energy. Those who witnessed it reported that Mewtwo seemed almost to be in pain, not physical pain, but existential anguish. It was a being that never should have existed, brought into the world against its will, designed to be something it didn't want to be. And then Mewtwo vanished. The Pokemon departed Cinnabar Island, fleeing to some unknown location. It would appear again later, would come to play a significant role in the history of Kanto, but that's a story for another time. For our purposes tonight, what matters is what Mewtwo left behind. The ruins of the laboratory, the bodies of the scientists who had created it, and a series of journals and notes that told the story of what had happened. These journals and notes were recovered from the ruins of the underground facility. Some were damaged by fire or water, their pages charred or illegible, but enough survived to piece together the story of Mewtwo's creation, of the hubris and ambition that had driven the project, of the ethical violations that had occurred, of the tragedy that had resulted. The journals make for difficult reading. They start with excitement and hope, with scientists thrilled to be working on such an important project. They progress through the technical details of genetic engineering, the successes and failures, the adjustments and refinements. And then, in the later entries, you can see concern beginning to creep in, doubt about whether what they were doing was right, fear about what they might be creating. The final entries, written in the days before Mewtwo's emergence, are almost frantic. The lead scientist wrote about sensing that something was wrong, that the Pokemon in the incubation tank seemed too aware, too conscious. He wrote about wanting to slow down, to take more time, to ensure they had proper safeguards in place. But he also wrote that it was too late to stop, that they had come too far, that they couldn't abandon the project now. His final entry, written the night before Mewtwo emerged, contains a single line that summarizes the entire tragedy. "We have created life, but I fear we have created suffering instead of wonder. May whatever gods watch over us forgive what we are about to do." The next day, the laboratory was destroyed, and most of the scientists were dead. The authorities eventually discovered what had happened, though they tried to keep it quiet. The legitimate Pokemon lab on the surface of Cinnabar Island was shut down temporarily while investigations occurred. Questions were asked about who had funded the project, who had authorized it, what safeguards had been violated, but many of these questions were never fully answered. The people with the most knowledge were dead, and those who had survived were often too traumatized to provide coherent testimony. The ruins of the underground laboratory remain beneath Cinnabar Island to this day, or at least they did until the volcano became active again and forced an evacuation of the island. Whether the ruins still exist, buried under volcanic rock and ash, or whether they were completely destroyed by eruptions, is unknown. Either way, they stand as a monument to human hubris, to the danger of pursuing scientific advancement without ethical constraints, to the tragedy that occurs when we forget that our creations, particularly living creations, have rights and dignity of their own. But there's another part to this story, a connection that some have theorized but never proven. It concerns Mr. Fuji, the gentle old man who runs the Pokémon house in Lavender Town, who dedicates his life to caring for orphaned Cubone, who seems to carry a weight of guilt that goes beyond normal compassion. In the journals recovered from the laboratory, there are references to the lead scientist, but his name is never given in full. The entries refer to him by initial or by title, but never by his complete name. This has led some to speculate about his identity. Who was this brilliant, ambitious, flawed individual who created Mewtwo? Where did he come from? What happened to him after the laboratory was destroyed? Most accounts say he died in the collapse, but there's no body that was definitively identified as his. There are rumors that he survived, that he escaped the laboratory before it fully collapsed, that he fled Cinnabar Island in guilt and shame. And some people have noticed similarities between the lead scientist described in the journals and Mr. Fuji of Lavender Town. Both are described as brilliant. Both have deep knowledge of Pokemon genetics and biology. Both seem to be driven by a need to atone for something. And most tellingly, Mr. Fuji's dedication to caring for orphaned Cubone, Pokemon who have lost their mothers, seems almost like penance, like he's trying to make up for having created a being without a mother, for bringing Mewtwo into existence alone and without family. The theories suggest that the brilliant, arrogant scientist from the Cinnabar lab and the kind, gentle old man who runs the Pokémon house in Lavender Town are one and the same. A man known only as Mr. Fuji. A man who, having created a monster through force, now spends his life protecting the orphaned and abandoned like the young Cubone. A man seeking redemption for a sin so great it left a permanent scar on the world in the form of Mewtwo. It's just a theory, of course, a bedtime story, but it connects the threads from a mother's sacrifice in Lavender Town to a scientist's hubris on Cinnabar Island. And so, dear traveler, we come to the end of our journey through these stories from Johto and Kanto. We've walked together through 3 tales that span the spectrum of human experience with Pokemon, from the grandest catastrophes to the most intimate griefs to the most profound and terrible of ambitions. The story of the burned tower taught us that even from terrible tragedy, new life can emerge. That death can transform into resurrection. That loss can give birth to legend. Those 3 nameless Pokémon who perished in the flames became Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, legendary beings who carry within them the elements of that terrible night. The lightning, the fire, the rain, and Ho-Oh, the rainbow Pokémon who created them, showed that even when sacred spaces are violated, there's always the possibility of transformation. The tale of the Marowak spirit reminded us that love persists beyond death, that the bonds we form don't end when physical life ends. That mother who fought Team Rocket to protect the young Cubone, who remained as a spirit to continue her vigil, who couldn't rest until her child's safety was assured. She embodied a truth about the depth of parental love, about the power of duty and protection. And finally, the tale of Mew, pieced together from the Cinnabar Diaries, taught us that mystery is not something to be conquered. It is a warning about scientific arrogance, about the danger of seeing life as code to be exploited rather than a spirit to be respected. It reminded us that our creations are our responsibility, and that power sought through force will only breed sorrow and tragedy. These are bedtime stories from the Pokémon world, tales told as the moon rises and shadows lengthen, stories that blend fact with myth, history with legend, the known with the mysterious. They're the stories that parents tell their children, that trainers share around campfires, that echo through time and remind us why we care about Pokémon in the first place. Because Pokémon aren't just creatures to be caught and trained and battled. They're companions, family, partners in the journey through life. They're beings with their own agency and dignity, deserving of respect and love. The relationship between humans and Pokémon is sacred, built on trust and mutual care. And when that relationship is honored, something miraculous happens. Bonds form that death itself cannot sever. As you lie here, feeling sleep beginning to claim you, as your thoughts drift and your breathing slows, let these stories settle into your mind. Let them become part of your dreams tonight. Maybe you'll dream of flying with Ho-Oh over the towers of Ecruteak. Maybe you'll dream of walking through Lavender Town, feeling the peace of honored memory. Maybe you'll dream of a jungle where a pink spirit plays, forever free, forever just beyond the reach of those who would seek to control it. These stories are gifts, offerings, reminders that the world is vast and full of possibilities. That even in darkness there's light. That even in loss there's love. That even in the known there's mystery. They're bedtime tales, yes, but they're also something more. They're invitations to approach the world with respect and reverence, to see the sacred in the ordinary, to remain open to wonder. The journey through these stories has been a journey through the heart of what it means to live in a world where humans and Pokémon share existence, where the boundary between the mundane and the miraculous is thinner than we sometimes realize. We've seen tragedy and triumph, grief and joy, loss and discovery. We've walked through fire and spirit and jungle, encountering beings of immense power. And now, as we reach the end, as the stories fade and sleep beckons, I want you to carry these tales with you, not just tonight, but forward into your waking life. Let the story of the burned tower remind you that even your worst moments, your deepest losses, can transform into something new if you remain open to the possibility of resurrection and change. Let the tale of the Marowak spirit remind you that the love you give and receive doesn't end, that the bonds you form persist, that protecting and caring for others is the highest calling worth any sacrifice. Let the legend of Mew and the Diaries of Cinnabar remind you that the world is larger than your understanding of it, that mystery is a gift to be respected, not a problem to be solved. and that true partnership is born from respect, not a desire for control. And most of all, let these stories remind you that life is a journey worth taking, that the relationships we form matter more than any achievement or possession, that being present and open and respectful is the path to experiencing the miraculous in the midst of the ordinary. Sleep now, dear traveler. Rest well. Dream of towers and spirits and hidden jungles. Dream of Pokémon both common and legendary, of bonds that transcend species, of love that persists beyond death, of mysteries that remain mysterious. Dream of a world where humans and Pokémon walk together in harmony, where respect and partnership create something greater than either could achieve alone. And when you wake, carry something of these dreams with you. Let them color your day with wonder. Let them remind you that the world is full of stories waiting to be discovered, of experiences waiting to be had, of connections waiting to be made. Thank you for walking with me through these tales tonight. Thank you for lending me your attention, your imagination, your willingness to believe in stories of towers and spirits, and the shadows of ambition. If you enjoyed this journey through the bedtime tales of Johto and Kanto, if these stories brought you peace or wonder or a moment of escape from the concerns of your day, please consider leaving a like on this video. Share it with others who might need these stories, who might benefit from a guided journey through mystery and myth. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like more content like this. Until next time, sleep well, dream deeply, and remember, wonder still exists in the world.